in this country. I also believe, like every other developed country in the world that has universal health care, that there is a role for private insurance to play for those who want it.
Do you think for those who are embracing taking away private insurance from people ultimately, is that just strategically, politically, a non-starter?
I don't know about the politics of it. I just think about it from the perspective of people, of the American people, that if all of a sudden you are taking away their choice, that's not a very American thing, in my opinion. I think our responsibility as leaders is to meet the challenge and address the problems that people are facing, that they are suffering because of big insurance and big pharma's influence over our healthcare system for so long, how they are profiting on the backs of sick people. So let's do our job, try to bring down the cost of healthcare in this country that's exorbitant, make sure people can get the quality care they need, and if they still choose that that's not what they want, they can go get the private insurance.
I asked Kamala.
So today I want to have a quick discussion about Tulsi Gabbard. Many of my viewers, at least those who follow American politics, might like Tulsi. I know a lot of people support Bernie amongst my viewership, and I do too. But a lot of people have someone like Tulsi Gabbard as their second choice. Some people have suggested that she would make a good VP pick for Bernie. She's young, she's a woman, she's racialized, like it would be a good counterplay to Bernie Sanders. And that she's also a progressive, at least from these people's understandings, that she was an early backer of Bernie, and it all makes sense. But I've always been really wary about Tulsi Gabbard for a whole bunch of reasons. And in the last few days, a couple have rushed right to the forefront, and we really need to talk about them. There's, of course, the issue around her, less than enthusiastic support for LGBTQ peoples. That's a recent development for her. Bernie Sanders, of course, has supported the rights of LGBTQ peoples for as long as Tulsi has been alive, if not longer. But Tulsi Gabbard, until recently, has had very troubling views there. And of course, this is to say nothing of her, at least somewhat of an acceptance of Narendra Modi, the president of India, who is a far-right nationalist and no progressive should support. Again, I'm sympathetic to the fact that, Gabbard being one of the first Hindus in Congress, has some kind of connection to India as the world's biggest Hindu nation, but Modi is not a representative of anything progressive, and no American leftist or Canadian leftist or whatnot should support the Modi regime in any way. But the two most recent things relate to impeachment, and they relate to Medicare For All. Tulsi Gabbard is a outlier in the Democratic Party right now. She suggests that the move to impeach Donald Trump will only divide the country. I think she's 100% wrong here. The country's already divided, and one of the reasons the country's divided is because of the crimes of the president that he should be impeached for. Look, the Democratic Party has moved too slow towards impeachment. It's been led by a few, progressive Congress people. Nancy Pelosi was very reluctant to do it, but now it's gaining broad support amongst the Democratic Party, and I think they're moving forward with it, and it doesn't hurt that the evidence continues to mount that the president is a crook. Like, let's be real. The president's a crook. His family's a crook. Many of his key advisors are crooks. Like, the president deserves to be impeached. And this idea from Tulsi that it's going to tear the country apart is absurd to me. Like, why is she sticking up for criminal President Donald Trump? What is she trying to gain from that? What's her angle? And I don't see any other than the fact that maybe she wants to support the president. And this president doesn't deserve any support. There is no further division on this front. Trump is an awful person. He's a criminal president. And there's a moral imperative to support impeachment. It's a moral imperative. It's like strategy. I get it. Strategy can matter. I get that. But there's a moral imperative right now that if they don't move towards impeachment now, then in the future, when future criminal presidents do criminal things, there will be less of a drive to do that. It's not just about politics. It's about sending a message that no one, including the goddamn president of the United States, is above the law. And so the impeachment processes are important. And it's very disappointing for a quote-unquote progressive like Tulsi Gabbard to be one of these, holdouts in supporting, the growing Democratic majority, which includes progressives, of course, in calling for Donald Trump's impeachment. And Medicare for All is maybe the biggest disappointment. You know, basically it's only Bernie who's consistent on this issue. So calling out Tulsi here is, you know, unfair in isolation because most of the Democratic presidential candidates are not in support of Medicare for All. They say they are sometimes, but then they wish-wash around it. Or they say they're not because they don't want to hurt existing plans or what have you. There's, you know, Biden and Harris and even Warren. They're not consistent like Bernie is. But a lot of Tulsi supporters said, well, she's a consistent backer for Medicare for All. But if you recall back to that first debate, they asked them to raise their hands. Do you support, you know, eventually, you know, ending private insurance plans and things like that? And Tulsi didn't raise her hand. Bernie Sanders did. Some other people did. Some of those people have flip-flopped. But Tulsi didn't. And just yesterday, Tulsi Gabbard outlined her position. And it's that if people want to keep their existing plans, they can. And so her position, at least now, sounds more like Pete Buttigieg's position than it does Bernie Sanders. You know, Buttigieg has that Medicare for all who want it, which is a catchy phrase, but it's not Medicare for all. And then there's Bernie's actual Medicare for all. And Gabbard seemed to be supporting Medicare for all if you read her website. But what she said yesterday, and it sort of flew under the radar, although people like David Dole and Mike Figueredo and Michael Brooks, we all sort of saw it on social media. And it confirmed what we all thought, that Tulsi isn't really committed to Medicare for all. What she said is that I'm going to give you a choice. If you want to keep your existing plan, you can. If you want the new Medicare for all system, you can have it. But that's not Medicare for all. It's just not. And so Tulsi Gabbard, on all of these fronts, is showing that she's not a committed progressive. She's not. She might not be the most right-wing person in the race, but she's not a committed progressive, and she shouldn't be compared to Bernie. And Bernie should not pick her as his vice presidential nominee. It's not in the cards, and it doesn't look good. She's standing up for Donald Trump. She's standing against Medicare for all. She's legitimizing a far-right nationalist in India. And her views on certain social issues are not nearly as clear and unequivocal as they could and should be. She's just not a clear progressive. And here's the issue here. And this also applies to Andrew Yang to some degree. A lot of people look back to 2015, 2016, and they say Bernie Sanders was so great because he challenged the establishment. He challenged the common sense. He challenged the consensus. And in so doing, he brought this new, exciting vision and energy to politics. And that made him great. And so now people are also looking to Tulsi Gabbard and Andrew Yang and saying, well, these people are also breaking down consensus and breaking down status quos and shaking things up and bringing new ideas and bringing new ways of doing politics. And that must make them good too. But it doesn't. Being anti-establishment does not make you good. Donald Trump was anti-establishment. It didn't make him good. Bernie Sanders is anti-establishment. But anti-establishment is not a connotative thing. It's a descriptor, but there's no basic connotation associated. There's bad anti-establishment figures, and there's good anti-establishment figures. And Bernie was a good anti-establishment figure because he supported socialist positions. So Bernie Sanders was good because he was socialist. And it just so happens that in the United States especially, there's no mainstream, position that a socialist could exist in, at least before Bernie. So all socialists by design were anti-establishment. But that's not what made Bernie great, not the anti-establishment part. It was the socialist part. And I see a lot of people falling into this trap saying Yang and Gabbard are great because they're anti-establishment. They're building on what Bernie did, but they're not. Yang and Gabbard in some ways are tearing down what Bernie's done, right? They don't support the unequivocal democratic socialist vision for America that Bernie Sanders does. They don't in some cases have these long historic records of supporting the most marginalized people. They build programs that in some cases will stabilize inequality instead of challenge it. Neither has made explicit commitments to end billionaires forever. These are real anti-establishment socialist views, and you're not getting them from the quote-unquote anti-establishment candidates like Gabbard and Yang. And so I just want progressives to realize that Tulsi Gabbard isn't all she's cracked up to be. I get why people like her. She's young. She's exciting. She's well-spoken. The way she owned Kamala Harris in the previous debates was legendary. She has some good positions, but to compare her to Bernie, or frankly, even Elizabeth Warren, isn't accurate. She's to the right of at least Bernie and at least Warren on most issues. And again, some people will say, well, she's the anti-war person, but she's siding with deeply, deeply troubling regimes in India and elsewhere. And I just cannot have that. Those are not peaceful regimes. Narendra Modi is not an arbiter of peace in the world. In no way is that the case. And Gabbard either supporting him or at the very least legitimizing him is not this anti-war image that Gabbard is often portrayed with. I just had enough of all the Tulsi Gabbard fawning. She just doesn't deserve it, guys. She just doesn't. Again, is she the worst in the race? No, she's not. But she does not deserve this support she's getting from progressives in any meaningful way. What progressives in the United States need to realize is what was true in 2016. It's gotta be Bernie. It's only Bernie. There's no Tulsi. There's nobody else. Even Elizabeth Warren, who I, again, think is better than Tulsi. It just doesn't compare. It's gotta be Bernie. It's gotta be Bernie Sanders. He is the only democratic socialist voice that can reasonably be elected by Americans to serve as their president, and he needs full backing. And even people who try to tie Tulsi Gabbard to Bernie Sanders are doing a disservice to Bernie, because Tulsi is no Bernie. She doesn't have the progressiveness. She doesn't have the receipts. She doesn't have the consistency. She doesn't have the clarity. She doesn't have that same democratic socialist worldview. She is just not as good. She's not even in the same ballpark. I would be really, really, really disappointed if Bernie picked Tulsi Gabbard to be his vice president. It's a dangerous move tactically, given all her complicated and troubling positions, and she's not the kind of progressive person that I would want to take over, God forbid, if Bernie Sanders could no longer serve as president. So guys, again, I know some of you are Tulsi backers or at least somewhat supportive of Tulsi, but it's time we moved on from her. Tulsi is done. It should be for progressives. Not supporting impeachment of a criminal, racist president and not supporting Medicare for All, those are two black and white issues that should end any progressive support for, a presidential candidate in this election.